Hi, welcome to my channel again. This is the coding coach, of course. If you're clicking on this video, I'm sure you know who you've reached. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to my channel. I am so glad that you guys are enjoying these videos. I'm enjoying making them for you guys. Thank you again for all of your support. Today's video is going to be about coding to the highest specificity. We're going to be talking about chronic kidney disease, which is also classified or abbreviated as CKD. We're going to talk about hypertension, heart failure, and we're going to talk about diabetes with complications. Now, if you are just introduced to coding, if you're taking your coding classes and things like that, then I'm sure you've heard the teachers say, make sure that you're coding to the highest level of specificity. So in this video, I'm going to go into detail about what they mean when they're saying the highest level of specificity. Basically, in a nutshell, it basically means being more specific. And the more specific you are, the more you can collect in revenue if you're the physician. So let's get into it. Okay. So slide 1. So we're going to talk about chronic kidney disease. Now there are 6 different stages, as you can see here. Chronic kidney disease stages. And the code is going to be N18.1 through N18.6. If you're looking in a documentation and you're reading a chart and it says chronic kidney disease and it does not have a stage, or if it says unspecified, then you're going to use the code N18.9. Now, I'm not sure if you can see the writing because it's kind of small on the first 2 columns. So this PowerPoint will also be available for you guys. I'll put the link down in the description box so you can get the link to get this PowerPoint if you're interested in it. And you can get this PowerPoint and kind of follow along with this video so you can get a better understanding of what's going on. So moving on along. Getting into more details, Z99.2, and that's the dependence on renal dialysis. Now, when you have chronic kidney disease, then usually when you have stage 3 or above, which is 3, 4, 5, and 6, and 6 is end-stage renal disease, and we'll get into that. But usually if you have stage 3 or above, then you're typically going to be on dialysis. So when you see in the chart, in the medical chart, when the physician says the patient is currently on hemodialysis or peritoneal dialysis, or just when the documentation supports and says that this patient is on dialysis, then you're going to use this code here. There's nothing that's going to indicate that says ding ding ding, here's a hint, use this code, because as a coder they expect you to know these things, especially if you're a certified coder. And if you don't capture all of the codes in the chart, then you're missing out on revenue for the physician. And sometimes it's kind of frowned upon because that's what they hire you for, to make sure that you're capturing all of the codes so they can get all of the money that's due to them. So anytime you see dialysis documented on the medical chart, make sure you use the code Z99.2. So another code we're going to use it's a Z code as well. All of these 3 codes here in the second column are Z codes, or you can say encounter codes. That's what we call them. So the second Z code is going to be Z94.0, and that's kidney transplant status. So if you're reading a medical chart and this person is currently on dialysis, they have left kidney failure, and they have a transplant of their right kidney, then that means they've had a transplant before. And anytime you read in the medical chart that a patient has had a kidney transplant, then you're going to use the code Z94.0. And that just let whoever is looking at the insurance, of course, when they're looking for to give you your reimbursement, the codes just let you know a clear picture of what's going on with this patient without even reading the medical chart. a person can look at the codes and they can get a true picture of what's going on with this patient just by looking at the codes. Okay, so again, we're going to talk about diabetes in this PowerPoint or in this detailed video. So anytime that the patient has been on insulin, not when the doctor is prescribing it for the first time, but if they've been on insulin, then you're going to use the code Z79.4, and that's for long-term use of insulin. And how you're going to determine that, you're going to look at the medications in the chart. And if the medication says that continue the insulin or things like that, then you're going to put Z79.4. Now, if it says start insulin, that means this is the first time that this patient is taking insulin or being prescribed insulin. So you're not going to use this code because this code is for long-term use of insulin, anytime after the first prescription has been prescribed. So diabetes. And there are many complications that can manifest due to diabetes. And type 1 diabetes is going to be E10. Anything that starts with E10 point anything, you know they're going to be talking about diabetes type 1. When you see E11 point whatever, you know they're going to be talking about diabetes type 2. Now, if you're reading inside of the medical chart and the physician just lists that the patient has diabetes and it doesn't specify whether it's type 1 or type 2, then you're going to automatically assume that it's type 2. You're automatically going to assume that. We're going to talk about heart failure and coding heart failure to the highest specificity because there are several types of heart failure. For example, you're going to have acute heart failure, chronic heart failure, systolic heart failure, diastolic heart failure. So it's different types of heart failure. So when you're getting into the specificity of things, then you have to be more specific. And then we're going to go into talking about hypertension. And hypertension is high blood pressure, and that's circulatory issues. And we're going to talk about this with correlation or interactions with chronic kidney disease, diabetes, and heart failure. So we talked about insulin and making sure you're coding Z79.4 when the patient is on insulin. So here's just a picture of what insulin looks like. And here is the syringe, because you know you have to inject the insulin. So I mentioned we'll go into more detail about the chronic kidney disease, and this is going to be talking about the interaction with diabetes. So here I have it listed the CKD or the chronic kidney disease code. Remember, if it's not documented as far as the stage, then you're going to use N18.9, which is saying it's unspecified. So here, a good way to kind of remember the chronic kidney disease codes is, as you can see, stage 1 is N18.1, stage 2 is 0.2, stage 3 is 0.3, and so on. And when you get to stage 6, sometimes in the medical chart, it may not say the patient has stage 6 kidney failure. It might just say ESRD, and that stands for the end stage renal disease. That means this patient has reached the end stage of their kidney disease. And when you see ESRD, you're going to automatically know that stage 6, and you're going to use N18.6. Okay, we talked about dialysis. We talked about the kidney transplant. So let's talk about diabetes in addition to having CKD. Now, this person, or I'll just say if a patient has chronic kidney disease and they also have diabetes, if it's listed in the chart or if it's assumed through the documentation that the diabetes and the chronic kidney disease are interactive of each other, one is causing the other, then instead of separately coding the things, you're going to have a combination code. So E1122 is going to be diabetes type 2 with CKD. And then you're going to also separately code whatever stage of CKD the patient has. So if the medical chart says the patient comes in, they are a diabetic, They also have kidney disease in correlation to having diabetes. And they have stage 3 kidney disease. So what you're going to do is you're going to use E1122, and that's going to be indicating that the patient has diabetes and CKD. And then you're also going to use N18.3, and that's letting us know what stage CKD the patient has. So if the patient has type 1 diabetes with chronic kidney disease, then you're going to use E10.22. Remember, another little tip you can remember, and it's a lot of little things once you get into the coding field, the coding world, once you get familiar with things, you'll kind of know where to look in your book for certain things. If I see type 1 diabetes listed on a chart, then I already know it's going to be listed from E10. So E13.29, and of course we talked about Z79.4. So E13.29 is other diabetes with other diabetic kidney complications. So let me explain that for you guys. A lot of this can be complicated. That's why it's very important to get the appropriate training. That's why it's very important to look up things on your own, because a lot of these things can be complicated if you don't study and if you're not dedicated to the process. So type 1 and type 2 diabetes are the most commonly conditions that people have in regards to diabetes, but there are other types of diabetes. Type 1 and type 2 is what we usually typically always hear about. So when the patient has another form of diabetes and they have kidney complications, and not so much as the kidney disease with any stages, but just complications, then you're going to use E13.29 when they have other diabetes other diabetes with other diabetic kidney complications. Then if they have diabetes type 2 with other kidney complications, then you're going to use the E11.29. And then as we talked about just then, you're going to use the E10.29 when you're talking about diabetes type 1. So here on the slide, I have the anatomy of the kidneys, the different, see you have the renal vein, the renal artery. So just the anatomy of the kidney to familiarize yourself with it, and also the dialysis process of the blood removed for cleaning all the way to the clean blood returning back to your body. So how CKD interacts with diabetes. Now, if you're reading a medical chart and you see diabetes uncontrolled, this means diabetes with hyperglycemia. If it says uncontrolled, then this automatically an indicator that this person has hypoglycemia. So E11.65 is going to be what, if you've been listening, correct, type 2 diabetes with hypoglycemia, and E10.65 is going to be type 1. Now, hypoglycemia is having high blood glucose levels, and this can damage the blood vessels in your kidneys. And when blood vessels are damaged, they don't work well. So this can cause all type of issues. The diabetes happens when your body does not produce enough insulin or cannot use insulin properly. And insulin is a hormone that controls how much sugar is in your blood. And again, glucose is another word for sugar, which goes back to ties into hypoglycemia. So that's why a lot of diabetes, or a lot of diabetics, or a lot of diabetes patients have to inject insulin because their body does not produce enough of it. So they're injecting it into themselves so their body can produce the amount that they need. Okay, so here's more diabetes information and guidelines. Now, diabetes without complication, if a person comes in, because keep in mind, you guys, when you have diabetes, it can cause other kind of manifestations, other kind of complications with your heart, your eyes, your circulatory system, your brain, just all type of issues. So if you see it's coded as E11.9, then this saying this person has diabetes, but they do not have any other complications associated with their diabetes. Even if they have other things listed as their diagnosis, it's pretty much saying is it's not related to the diabetes. So when reading the medical charts, only use E11.9 when there are not diabetes-related complications or not diabetic-related complications. When the patient has diabetes in addition to a manifestation or complication of the disease, do not use E11.9, because again, 11 says there's nothing else wrong. So what you're going to do, for example, like the hypoglycemia, you can call hypoglycemia has a code on its own. So if the doctor writes the patient has diabetes type 2, and the patient also, as a result, has hypoglycemia, hyperglycemia, you're not going to code the diabetes E11.9 and then code the hypoglycemia by itself. You're going to use that combination code that I showed you, E11.65 if it's type 2 or E10.65 if it's type 1 with hypoglycemia. So here I have an example. Patient has diabetes type 2 and lower leg bilateral extremity pain, which is polyneuropathy. The polyneuropathy is a complication of diabetes. Do not code the E11 for the diabetes type 2 and then the G62.9, which is polyneuropathy. Don't code these separately. You want to know why? Because there is a combination code. And the combination code for diabetic polyneuropathy is E11.42, which is diabetes type 2 with diabetic polyneuropathy, and that's the combination code. And if it was diabetes type 1, then of course you guys already know that you'll be using E10.42. So diabetic neuropathy and polyneuropathy, because you'll see those a lot. You're going to see regular neuropathy, and then you're going to see polyneuropathy. Neuropathy is diabetic neuropathy is going to be E11.40. Diabetic polyneuropathy is going to be E11.42. Now here you go, some typical peripheral neuropathy symptoms: a loss of feeling, freezing, tingling, numbness, burning sensation, sharp jabbing pains, and hypersensitivity. Now here's the difference between polyneuropathy and neuropathy. A lot of things you must know to be a successful, efficient, proficient, reliable coder. So knowing medical terminology is very important as a medical coder. We have a lot of videos on this channel, probably about 3 or 4, I won't say a lot. So I have about 3 or 4 videos on this channel that's dedicated to medical terminology. And actually there's one video that's recorded during the live session of the live class. So if you know your medical terminology, then you know poly means many. Pathy is going to denote or mean that this is a disorder in a particular part of the body. Polyneuropathy is when multiple peripheral nerves become damaged, which is also called peripheral neuropathy. So if you see just regular neuropathy or if you see peripheral neuropathy, it's talking about the same thing. It's synonymous together. So that's when peripheral nerves, peripheral nerves are the nerves outside of the brain and spinal cord. Hint, if the patient is having neuropathic issues with only one lower extremity, the diagnosis is typically just neuropathy or diabetic neuropathy if they have diabetes. Now, if it's bilateral, which is bi means two, both legs, both lower extremities, then you're going to usually use polyneuropathy. So now let's get into hypertension and CKD. So hypertension is a condition, and hypertension is pretty much high blood pressure. You already know there's a lot of fancy names for things, but they can mean the same thing, just like I can say lawyer, or I can say attorney. I can say doctor, or I can say physician. So I can say high blood pressure, or I can say hypertension, but it's synonymous. So hypertension is a condition in which the force of the blood against the artery wall is just too high. And hypertension is how physicians usually write it in the medical charts, HTN is usually how they abbreviate it. So if you see HTN while you're coding, then that's going to stand for hypertension. Now, hypertension is defined as blood pressure above 140/90, and is considered severe if the pressure is above 180/120. Now, the two numbers are called systolic and diastolic. Now, I'll give you a tip here to remember which number. You know how they read your blood pressure? Like I have an example here where it says 140/90. The 140 is going to be the systolic number, and the the 90 is going to be the diastolic number. And how I remember that is when I was in pharmacy tech school, our teacher gave us a little tip to remember, and it's always stuck with me. So if I'm thinking about two numbers, and if I put them underneath each other, 140, draw a line and put the 90 underneath. The 90 is down. So down starts with a D. And that's how I remember that the second number is the diastolic number. Diastolic, down. That's the second number. So of course, the first number is going to be the systolic number. So to sound like you kind of know what you're talking about, the next time you go to the doctor, and they read your blood pressure. And of course, they don't always tell you your blood pressure. They'll just take it and record it. Sound a little fancy the next time you go to the doctor and say, hey, doc, what was my systolic blood pressure? And they're going to be like, ooh, she's fancy. Or he's fancy. So start trying to, kind of get familiar with a lot of these terms and words, and you kind of try them out at your doctor's office to kind of see the reactions when you know kind of what you're talking about. So that's a tip that I remember when I use the systolic and diastolic numbers. So hypertension and CKD. Hypertension is one of the leading causes of chronic kidney disease, along with diabetes and obesity. So elevated blood pressure leads to damage of blood vessels within the kidney, as well as throughout the body. And this damage impairs the kidney's ability to filter fluid and waste from the blood. And that's where the dialysis comes in, where it filters your blood and stuff for you because you're unable to do it on your own. I hope all of this is coming together to make sense for you. So this damage impairs the kidney's ability to filter fluid and waste from the blood, leading to an increase of fluid volume in the blood, thus causing an increase in blood pressure. So link the two conditions with combination codes when they are related. So as you see here, I have I-12.0, and that's going to be hypertension, CKD with stage 5 CKD or end-stage renal disease. So if you're reading a medical chart and you see that this person has chronic kidney disease, and then you see if they have stage 5, or if you see if they have the last stage, which is end-stage renal disease, then you're automatically, and especially in addition to the hypertensive issues with the CKD, then you're going to use I-12.0. And this code signifies that this patient has hypertension and either stage 5 or the end stage of chronic kidney disease. If you're going to use I-12.9, this is signifying or indicating that this person is hypertensive, they have CKD, but the stage is 1 through 4, or it's not listed and it's unspecified. In addition to using these codes here, make sure you always also list the stage. Because you see here, it says stage 5 or end stage. It means you can have either or. So make sure you list the stage of the kidney failure that the patient has. And you can only list it if it's in the documentation. And if it's not listed, again, if it just says that they have CKD, then just use unspecified, which is N18.9. So let's talk about heart failure, highest specificity. So I'm not sure if you know, but there are several types of heart failure. The key in helping physicians to increase their revenue is to ask them to be more specific when they're documenting patient encounters. When a physician lists that a patient has heart failure, they are not being specific. Therefore, you use the code I50.9, which is heart failure unspecified, because they are not specifying what kind of heart failure that this patient has. So here's a picture of the anatomy of the internal view of the heart. And here you see where it says familiarize yourself with the internal anatomy of the heart. And learning about your arteries and veins will give you a better understanding of how the heart functions. So here, as you see, here's all of the parts. And this is an internal view of the heart. So the ICD-10 codes for a specified heart failure, there's a lot of them. So we'll get into the specifics of these heart failure codes. So here's an external view. External, outside, internal, inside. Learn the external elements of the heart in order to understand how this how this organ functions. Here you go again, I'm sorry. And here's a clear view or a picture of the external anatomy. So look for the documentation to support the diagnosis. Now you can't just, make up whatever kind of specific heart failure that this patient has. It has to be documented in the chart what kind of specific heart failure that this patient has. So look for the documentation to support the diagnosis. So you're going to start with I50. I50 means heart failure. So that's the category you're going to go to when you're looking for heart failure codes. And I'll give you a moment just to look over the codes I've listed here. Okay, so you have listed I50.1, which is left ventricular failure, unspecified. I50.2, systolic. And we talked about systolic and diastolic when it came to blood pressure. So you also can have systolic and diastolic heart failure. So I go on to list more, I50.2, .20, 21, 22. You see how it gets more specific? To have systolic heart failure. I have unspecified systolic congestive heart failure. Then I have acute systolic congestive heart failure. I have chronic systolic congestive heart failure. So it gets more and more specific. So make sure that you're paying attention to the specifics. So more specified heart failure codes, I50.3. This is diastolic, and we talked about diastolic heart failure. I50.30, unspecified diastolic congestive heart failure. I50.4, and this is combined systolic and diastolic together congestive heart failure. So let's take a look at how all three conditions, hypertension, CKD, and heart failure interact. Let's dig on down deep. Let's go. So hypertension, hypertensive heart disease refers to heart conditions caused by high blood pressure. If you have any conditions of the heart that are caused by having high blood pressure, then it's going to be called hypertensive heart disease, which is a combination of hypertension and heart disease. So hypertensive heart disease refers to heart conditions caused by high blood pressure. The heart working under increased pressure causes some different heart failure, thickening of the heart muscle, coronary artery disease, and other conditions. So here are a few codes to the side. Here I have I11.0, and that's going to be hypertensive heart disease without heart failure, with heart failure. With I11.0 is hypertensive heart with heart failure. And now, as you can see, I have E11.9, and that's hypertensive heart without heart failure. I-12.0, hypertensive CKD with stage 5 or the end stage renal disease. So when you use this code, this is going to be in the instance where you're reading the chart and the doctor has linked hypertensive CKD together. So you're going to use this code when you see that they have hypertension and chronic kidney disease. And in addition to using I-12.0, you're going to also, what? You guys remember? You're going to also code the stage of the chronic kidney disease. And if the stage is not documented, you're going to use unspecified. So I-12.9, that's hypertensive CKD, and that's with stage 1 through stage 4, or unspecified. So continuing to dive in, we have a lot of codes listed here. I-13.0, like I said, the PowerPoint will be available. So I don't want to take up a lot of time, just going specifically through each one. I just want to hit on it, and then you can kind of look it up and Google it in addition to listening to this video to kind of get more information. But I wanted to give you the ground foundation of all of the interactions of these diseases together, because when you're coding, you're going to find these diseases, especially in HCC coding, is going to be the leading diseases that these patients have. So I-13.0 is going to be hypertensive heart and CKD with heart failure. So that's all three of these. There's hypertensive, there's heart failure, and there's chronic kidney disease. And it's also saying this is going to be the code for stage 1 through 4 or unspecified. So remember, in addition to using this I-13.0 code, you're going to specify the stage of heart failure. Excuse me, the stage of CKD, and you're going to also list the type of heart failure. It gets tricky. It gets tricky. So again, here you see I have listed hypertensive heart and CKD without heart failure, and this is stage 5 or end stage. Same here. And I'll go here, you see where it says I-15.0, and this is renal vascular hypertensive, and this is secondary high blood pressure if it's due to any renal or kidney disorders that you may have. So let's go into a few scenarios to just make sure you got the gist or you got the basic foundation of this video. So here's a few scenarios that I found that's related to these interactions, and let's go and jump into it. So the first scenario, the patient is discharged with a final diagnosis. And getting into medical terminology, if you're not all the way familiar with that, if you see DX, then that's going to stand for diagnosis. And a lot of times, as you know, doctors don't like to write everything out. They have scribble handwriting. So that's just a part of how they function as far as using short-term or shorthand writing. So the patient is discharged with a final diagnosis of exacerbated, congestive heart failure and a secondary diagnosis of hypertension. So for this patient, the congestive heart failure and the hypertension would be coded as I-11.0, hypertensive heart disease with heart failure, since the causal relationship is assumed due to the word with, which is following the main term. If you look in the alphabetic index in your coding book, your ICD-10 book, under hypertension. So since the heart disease falls within the code range of I-50 or I-51.4 or I-51, through I-51.9, then this link will be assumed. Now, if there's any kind of heart conditions outside of the I-50s or this I-51.4 through .9, then you're not going to link it. Additional code for the type of heart failure would also be assigned as the secondary diagnosis. So that means the primary diagnosis of the first one is going to be I-11.0, and then you're going to specify the type of heart failure. Now, this was verified at the AHEMA Coding Community Meeting in Baltimore, Maryland on October 15th, 2016 by Nellie Leon Christie. So the second scenario is the patient is discharged with the final diagnosis or atherosclerotic, heart disease or CKD with unstable angina and hypertension. For this patient, the causal relationship will not be linked because the heart disease does not fall within the code of I-50 or I-51.4 through I-51.9. The CKD falls up under the code of I-25. So you're not going to assume that this heart disease and this hypertension is linked. You're only going to assume it's linked if it's coming from I-50 categories or 51.4 through 51.9. So I hope you have both, I hope you have both enjoyed this video and also learned something from this video. This was a subject that took me a lot of time to kind of learn and gather a lot of research on. So when I'm reading these medical charts, I can easily and proficiently capture all of these codes when it's a link between kidney disease, hypertension, heart failure, diabetes, and things like that. So again, thanks for joining me. Thanks again for your support. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to my channel. And I look forward to bringing you more and more videos. Thank you.